Grove from Pretoria. Is everything all right? People talk, say things.
Hello?
Why didn't you tell me it was out of order? I suppose you think that's funny.
I'm not allowed out the front door.
Who says you weren't?
Them.
Who?
Them.
It was terrible out there. I could hear breathing.
We told you.
Are you worried about the man?
They hate us. That's the truth. They want to kill and torture every one of us. You can see it in their eyes.
Come now, Frederick. Do you dream about unholy things?
I really don't like what's going on here. There's something wrong, and that's a fact.
Wait. What did you dream last night? This manifestation of evil. You must be delivered from evil.
Kid, mind if I take a swig of milk?
Knock yourself out.
Ulcers. All I do these days is drink fucking milk.
My heart bleeds.
Yeah, well, so do my ulcers, you punk bastard. What the goddamn hell's this about? There's easier ways to commit suicide, you
There's
know.
a dead man downstairs who found a harder way.
Louis? If you killed Louis, so help me.
Campagna's okay. He'll have a headache to make a hangover seem like Christmas, but he's okay. Fatso, too.
Then who?
A blonde guy, I don't know his name, but I've seen him around.
Have you?
Last time was at Bayfront Park when you sent him to help kill Cermak. Time before that, I saw him running down Randolph Street when Capone sent him to kill Jake Lingle. And tonight, you sent him to kill Nate Heller. But he didn't quite get the job done, did he?
You're wrong on that last count, kid. Dead wrong.
Then you sent that son of a bitch to Florida just to catch some sun?
I didn't say I didn't send him to Florida. What I do say is I didn't send him to kill you.
He pushed me off a skyride tower tonight, Frank. And you know I really don't like heights. I should be a twisted sack of bones and meat on a morgue tray about now, but somehow I'm not. I'm here. He's dead, and so are you. So are you, Nitty. I wish to Christ Lang had killed you that afternoon. I wish to Christ I didn't make them call an ambulance for you.
Heller, I didn't send him. I didn't even know the bastard was in town. He doesn't work for me.
He doesn't work for anybody now.
Something you aren't at all aware of. Why am I not already dead?
The silenced automatic in my hand raised to aim itself at his forehead.
You are dead. Fuck you.
Wait, just wait. Lower that goddamn thing, will you? Just hear me out. I didn't say he never done work for me. He's a guy Johnny Torrio recommended to Al back on the Lingle deal. I used him later myself. Used him now and then on ticklish matters.
Oh, is that what I am? A ticklish matter?
Kid, I know how you feel. I know the kind of emotions you got running wild in you. I know all there is to know about revenge. You could ask 10% Tony if he wasn't in hell. But I didn't hire a contract on you. I swear by all that's holy.
And I'm supposed to believe that because of all the Catholic shit on the walls? Who sent him then, Frank?
I don't know the answer to that. Not for sure. But I can figure it out, and so can you, if you try.
I was getting confused, starting to wonder what the hell I was doing.
Although edited for television, tonight's thriller contains scenes of suspense and violence which may be unsuitable for young viewers. Parental discretion is advised.
Observations with Robert Meyer Burnett.
Well, greetings, imagination connoisseurs. Once again, it is I, your Duke of Dope Discourse, your master of fun and wonder, your viceroy of verisimilitude, your sommelier of sci-fi and cinema, your evangelist of the imagination, and of course the perhaps never to be defined existential Mr. Rogers. That's right, me, Robert Meyer Burnett.
Amazing. Too good to be true.
It's too good to be true. He's 6'4", has black hair, blue eyes, doesn't drink, doesn't smoke, and tells the truth.
Mr. Smucker, some people can read War and Peace and come away thinking it's a simple adventure story. Others can read the ingredients on a chewing gum wrapper and unlock the secrets of the universe.
Lex, what has chewing gum got to do with the secrets of the universe?
Right, Miss Desmond.
Greetings, imagination connoisseurs. Once again, I'm Rob, casting at you imagination connoisseurs, you members of this, the Post-Geek Singularity community. This is, of course, Robservations, episode number 1039. So, I was looking for something to talk about tonight after last night's stream, and whenever you discuss superhero movies, you get lots of different points of view. And, I'm not going to lie. It's always something that attracts viewers to the channel. People subscribe. There is that. And then people come and yell at me too. So it's a double-edged sword. But it's, I think it was it's worth talking about. Obviously, we got a new Superman spot. The Rivals spot that came out during the first game of the NBA Finals, which is pretty interesting. And I've seen the trailer in the theater a couple of times now, along with the Fantastic Four trailer for the new Superman. And I have to say that I am incredibly fascinated by what Warner Brothers, what David Zaslav has done, giving James Gunn and Peter Safran their own studio, DC Studios. It's of course underneath the Warner banner, but it is still their own studio. Now, I find that interesting because of how all of this started to play out. We are 25 years into what I would call the modern era of the superhero film. Now, you could go back into the 90s if you wanted to. You could talk about comic book adaptations such as The Crow, still one of my favorites, in 94, 31 years ago. Of course, Blade, New Line Cinema's Blade. Actually, both those films came out from New Line. I see Blade, though, as you could talk about Steel if you wanted to. I think that both Blade and The Crow were isolated elements. The Crow is, of course, based on an indie comic. Blade was based on a lesser-known Marvel character, which is probably why the movie was allowed to get made. I quite liked Blade. Obviously, it spawned 2 sequels. But it really wasn't until Bryan Singer and the 2000s rolled around, in actually the year 2000, that we got X-Men. And what was really interesting about, Bryan Singer, he was chosen to direct that movie because of The Usual Suspects, and because of The Usual Suspects being an ensemble cast. And the reason that he was chosen is how deft he was with dealing with all those different actors and creating indelible characters. Obviously, the film won 2 Academy Awards, one for Chris McQuarrie's screenplay, or I guess I should call him McHugh's screenplay, and of course Kevin Spacey playing Kaiser Soze, Verbal Kint. Spoiler alert. But then in 2000 we got X-Men. And the producer of X-Men, Lauren Shuler Donner, Richard Donner's wife, obviously they have their own, Richard Donner has his own legacy. You saw a clip from Superman, 1978 Superman, that a clip I particularly love. Played it last night too. But the interesting thing about X-Men is the approach that Bryan took, which was not the approach that Lauren Shuler Donner liked. She had acquired the rights to X-Men, and Bryan had never seen or read he never read any X-Men comics, and when he was tapped for the job, Tom DeSanto, his fellow producer, had Bryan watch, and at the time working for Bryan, had Bryan watch the X-Men animated series, which he quite loved, and that was sort of his way into understanding who the X-Men were. And working on the screenplay, they made the audacious choice to begin at Auschwitz, a concentration camp that actually, yes, it did exist, and yes, many people were exterminated there. But to open a superhero movie like that, where you saw Magneto torn away from his mother, and then jumping forward in time, and you saw Jean Grey giving an address, and seeing Patrick Stewart and Ian McKellen square off against one another, I would dare say that the squaring off between Magneto and Xavier, setting up the tone of X-Men, was where the modern superhero film was born. There was a gravitas and a weight. Remember, this is pre-Lord of the Rings. So Ian McKellen, fantastic actor. Bryan had worked with him previously, playing, I think the character's name is Dusander, in Apt Pupil. And we'd seen, I don't know if if you guys have not seen Ian McKellen in the World War II set Richard III, the Shakespeare adaptation, Richard III. Robert Downey Jr. is in it. It's incredible. Incredible. But obviously, fan favorite Patrick Stewart to play Xavier. Really audacious. Hugh Jackman, of course, a last-minute replacement. And what Brian was able to do was take the fantastical and tonally bring it down to earth. I mean, the Brotherhood of Evil Mutants, Sabretooth, Toad, it could have gone in many different directions. And then grounding it with the stories of Rogue and Wolverine. You all know the story. I don't have to rehash it. But what it did was it set a tone, and it showed that a superhero movie could also be relevant to today, relevant to all audiences, not just us, not just we imagination connoisseurs, but it could be a great ride, great adventure. And at the time, it opened to $56 million. It was one of the most successful openings of any film ever in history, immediately making Hugh Jackman a star, and a new era was born, the modern era of science fiction films, superhero movies. And then, of course, Sam Raimi followed that up with Spider-Man. And then within there, we had a few other things. You had Ghost Rider, you had Ben Affleck's Daredevil, which I really like Mark Steven Johnson's The Director's Cut, a spinoff, an Elektra spinoff, you all know what happened. And then in 2008, the MCU was born. Now, what was very interesting to me was to see, obviously at Warner Brothers, they had got into the superhero business. I mean, they had made Steel, but they wanted to bring back, they were sort of moribund in terms of Batman and Robin killed the DC superhero adaptations for the time being. But what was very interesting was Christopher Nolan, not unlike what Kevin Feige would do later with directors like James Gunn. Christopher Nolan had made Following, he'd made Memento, and then the studio, based on his success with Memento, tapped him to do a remake of Insomnia, where he got to work with two big stars and make a movie under the auspices of Warner Brothers, and they were very, very impressed with Nolan and what he had done with Insomnia. So they really had nothing to lose, and they threw him Batman. Would you like to take a shot at Batman? This is back in 2005. And of course, Christopher Nolan, his brother Jonathan, very much, working amongst themselves. And of course, Christopher Nolan's wife became a producer, and they created the first of his Batman trilogy. And then as Nolan was making his Batman trilogy across the way over at Disney, actually it was not across the way over at Disney yet, it was at Paramount, where the MCU was born, because remember, the MCU didn't start at Disney, it started at Paramount. Disney acquired Marvel. But at first, they were making Iron Man, and Iron Man was kind of a mess when they made it. And you can hear stories about how Jeff Bridges tells the story of how they would all get together, Robert Downey Jr. and Jon Favreau, and Favreau being a writer himself, they had like a caucus, and they were coming up with scenes and making scenes better. And Iron Man came out in 2008, and it made $500 million, and that's all she wrote. But at the same time, you had Nolan making his 3 Batman movies, and then he was also making movies like The Prestige and Inception. And Marvel was getting more and more successful. Well, once Nolan wrapped his trilogy, DC, what they really wanted to do was do what Marvel was doing. And after Marvel, was building slowly, brick by brick. And the thing that Marvel did that was very, very smart is they did not focus on the superheroics of it all. They focused on character. Iron Man 1 is a very intimate story. Robert Downey Jr. is in almost every scene. It's a movie about one guy. It's not about some apocalyptic end-of-the-world scenario. It's about one guy who has a change of heart, crisis of conscience, and ends up having to fight for what he believes in, to make his estranged father, who's now passed away, proud of him. He had his mentor, Obadiah Stane. It's a story that is completely character-based. And Marvel did the same thing with Thor and with Captain America in Captain America, the First Avenger. This was a brilliant way to go. And Brian had done the same thing in X-Men 1 and in X2. And of course, Sam Raimi had done the same thing to show that how do you make a great superhero film in the modern age? You concentrate first on character. The superheroics will take care of themselves. The technology was increasing year by year, But what you needed was character. And we got that with Nolan's Batman. We got that with the superhero films of the aughts. And then, of course, they finally decided after the Batman trilogy wrapped up that Christopher Nolan and Zack Snyder, who had also had great success at Warner Brothers, at adapting Dawn of the Dead, but adapting 300 and adapting Watchmen. He was a natural to go to because he could understand as a director, how do you faithfully, 300 and Watchmen are great recreations of a comic book into another medium. I don't know if Watchmen is a great adaptation. Watchmen's one of my favorite comics. I probably read it 50 times. I love what Zack Snyder was doing with Watchmen, and it is a beautiful recreation of the comic, and I quite enjoy watching it. There are certain, I will say, there are certain things I don't think work if you watch the extended, the Ultimate Edition with the Black Freighter animated segments. I don't think those work. Those work particularly well in the comic because that was a commentary on the medium of comic books themselves. And I know Zack Snyder wanted to adapt all of the book, but by putting those in that Ultimate Edition, it didn't really make sense for them to be in a movie. But that's neither here nor there. But Zack Snyder had proven himself an incredible visual stylist, and he could certainly, again, direct the action and make it visually interesting. So Christopher Nolan and Zack Snyder teamed up, and the result was Man of Steel. Now, 2006 saw the release of Superman Returns. That obviously was a disappointment for the studio. And as people know, I was actually in that movie. I played a NASA reporter, and I did a documentary. You can see it online. You can get it on the Blu-ray of Superman Returns, a 3-hour documentary. I worked on that for 2 years. I was in Australia during the entire production of that film. But it was very interesting to see how a Superman film, it had been decades since we'd seen one, how it was approached, and to see every facet. I was there for Brandon Routh's screen test, all the way to the wrap of principal photography. Fascinating time. But then Man of Steel was made, and when Man of Steel came out, I really liked the film. As John Campea will say, he thinks it's the most underrated superhero movie ever made. I really liked the science fiction approach to it. I kind of like that prog rock Yes Songs album cover depiction of Krypton. And I really enjoyed all the imagery, the fact that the movie's entirely handheld. If you watch the film, go back and watch it again. It's entirely handheld, which gave it an interesting feel, an immediacy to it, an intimacy that I think really was an interesting choice. And I think it really worked well. Hans Zimmer's score, really incredible. Loved all the cast of the film. There were certain missteps. I was going back and forth on Twitter today, how I thought the death of Jonathan Kent was a mistake. I did. The one thing in the movie that's always irked me is that I don't believe in any way, shape, or form during the midst of a gigantic storm, Superman would have rescued his father. Kal-El would have rescued his father no matter what. He couldn't have helped himself. He's not going to sit there and watch his father die. I understand that Jonathan Kent has to die, but in that particular scenario, I understand what they were trying to say. Because earlier, Jonathan Kent says, what if we're supposed to let those kids die? Jonathan Kent's like, I don't know. I thought that was a misstep. I thought that was they could have figured out a different way to do it, but whatever. I like Man of Steel. Man of Steel was a disappointment. In the wake of what was going on at Marvel, they were expecting Man of Steel to make between $750 million and $1 billion. It did not. It was respectable, but it cost $225 million to make, not including P&A. But the real problem at Warner Brothers was the administration, the people that were running the studio at the time. Studio executives are not exactly the best people to, you can't be following in somebody's footsteps. And, shareholders, I understand the pressure was enormous. The Kevin Tsujihara regime at Warner Brothers was chasing Marvel. Why aren't we, we've got the DC universe. Why aren't we making those kinds of films? And of course, then they did something very ambitious. They gave Zack Snyder the ability to put Batman and Superman together in a movie. Now, the thought was, this is going to be it. This is going to be the biggest. We have the two biggest superheroes of all time. We're going to make this movie. Hey, we're going to put Wonder Woman in there. We're going to put everything but the kitchen sink in there. And then it was I thought an overstuffed movie by adding Lex Luthor and adding Doomsday, you know, from Death of Superman, and they combined Death of Superman and Frank Miller's Dark Knight Returns. And then you have nightmare visions of what was going to continue on with the anti-life equation and Darkseid coming to Earth from Apocalypse and all this stuff, which should have been amazing. But here's the thing. They got cold feet. They got cold feet, and there's a lot of other things going on. Zack Snyder had a personal issue. But what they were going to do was they were going to do Batman v Superman, and they were going to do 2 Justice League movies, basically, and tell this bigger, sprawling story. But they were doing this because that's what the studio wanted. There was an upcoming merger. They were jumping the gun. And I think that Batman v Superman became a fulcrum, and I don't know necessarily if that was the movie that Zack Snyder wanted to make. And of course, Christopher Nolan stepped back, and the ideas of creating this extended DC universe, shepherded by Zack Snyder and Christopher Nolan himself, kind of went away. They did other things like David Ayer's Suicide Squad. The studio was really worried because the tone of these movies was much darker than what Marvel was doing, and they balked at that. So the studio basically kicked David Ayer out of the edit bay and recut Suicide Squad into, honestly, I've never seen a big budget studio movie that was more incompetently edited in my life. It was all over the place. And as a film editor myself, I was looking at this going, who cut this? And of course they had trailer company come in, and really sad. It would have been really interesting to see what David Ayer would have done, release the Ayer cut. But the studio is to blame. The studio is to blame. And, you know, I remember reading an article about how the studio was very excited about Batman v Superman. But then I think that the direction they went in, that film, Batman v Superman, Dawn of Justice, is a very, very, very mean-spirited movie. I mean, I enjoy it, but it is very mean-spirited. And to the point where if you go back and you watch, say, X-Men 1, even though you've got the Brotherhood of Evil Mutants in it, and it's got their villains and they do terrible things to Bruce Davidson, the senator, it's still at its core a enjoyable comic book romp that, yes, you can take, even though it begins at Auschwitz, you can take the kids. Batman v Superman is a movie that is relentlessly oppressive, and it is not a 4-quadrant film. And as much as I might enjoy it, even I will have to admit that I really would have liked, in my case, if I was in charge of the studio, I would have said, listen, why don't you concentrate? You could have just taken Batman and Superman and Wonder Woman. And, you know, Batman's older and more grizzled, and he's just like, I'm tired of, I'm going to let myself off the leash, and I'm going to start doing what I really need to do to clean up Gotham. And, you know, Clark Kent, Superman, Kal-El, he decides, no. And their philosophical rivalry could have been really interesting. You know, did you need Doomsday? I guess you have to have Luthor. But having Wonder Woman come in between them could have been they could have made a different kind of a movie. But no, they wanted the big bucks. They wanted Avengers money. Avengers had come out and made $1.5 billion, even more. And that's what they were looking for. And so the studio, of course, there was all kinds of interference. And then ultimately, you all know what happened. Zack Snyder, because of personal reasons and also because the studio didn't like his approach. They didn't like what he was doing. And he was unceremoniously let go from Justice League. And they brought in, who they bring in? Joss Whedon, who'd made the Avengers movies that they were trying to emulate. Totally understand why they did it. But that's not how you make movies. You don't change mid-direction. And everybody got screwed. Justice League was a mess. It didn't make the money they wanted it to make. And it just didn't work. However, not to rehash everything, we did get a lot of really interesting things out of it. Patty Jenkins took over, but Wonder Woman was a monstrous hit, almost made $1 billion itself. I thought a pretty wonderful movie, even though they had to bring in Ares at the end and, you know, give her a god to fight, which I understand. James Wan, which I'm going to talk about in a minute, made Aquaman, which I loved. I thought Aquaman was goofy fun. I loved it. I loved Aquaman. Made over $1 billion. And then, of course, there were all kinds of things. There was Harley Quinn and Birds of Prey, which was a spinoff of Suicide Squad, which was middling. You had Dwayne Johnson making Black Adam. And I'm going to say it. If it ruins my credibility, I don't care. I liked Andy Muschietti's Flash. You know, is it overstuffed? Perhaps. But in terms of what it did, I enjoyed it. I enjoyed The Flash. I really liked Ezra Miller despite his problems in real life. I thought he was great casting. I loved how he was portrayed in Zack Snyder's Justice League. And eventually we did get Zack Snyder's Justice League. I really loved adding all the cyborg stuff back into the film. I really enjoy Zack Snyder's Justice League. I really do. And I never thought it was going to happen. You know, like I've explained before, I've talked so many times about this. I said, look, the reason that I knew that Zack Snyder's Justice League was not going to happen, and I would say it's not going to happen, is because no one's going to throw good money after bad. You have to have somebody pay for it. And everybody thought Zack Snyder's Justice League was like finished. It was never finished. And he finally came out and said it was a black and white version on my laptop. It cost him $70 million. When HBO Max was introduced, like I was saying last night, the first thing I said is they're gonna with all the fan outcry and the money fans had raised, and Zack Snyder's Justice League is a triumph for Zack Snyder and Deborah Snyder, and it's a triumph for all of fandom. It was fantastic, and I loved it. All 4 hours of it. I mean, I loved it. But the DC universe kind of was directionless. When James Gunn came over, of course, he made The Suicide Squad, which James Gunn, coming off of 3 wins for Marvel, well, it was 2 at the time, but a 3rd win with Guardians of the Galaxy 3, and of course Suicide Squad. And now James Gunn had come from, he wrote his first movie in 1996. He wrote Tromeo and Juliet for Lloyd Kaufman's Troma Films, which is why Lloyd Kaufman cameos in James's movies. I got to know James a little bit because I worked on a film. I was the associate producer. I started out as a producer, but I got demoted in post. I was the associate producer of a movie he wrote called The Specials, which is a very low-budget superhero movie that was directed by Craig Mazin, the first thing he ever directed, who now you know him from Chernobyl and, of course, The Last of Us. So James Gunn played Minute Man. Thomas Hayden Church was in it. Patchett Brewster was in it. Rob Lowe was in it. If you haven't seen The Specials, it's kind of a hoot. If you're interested in seeing what $1 million superhero film would look like with a great comedic cast, a script with James Gunn, and James Gunn playing Minute Man, check out The Specials. That's where I got to know him. Really admired him. He was very smart, very funny, very much an imagination connoisseur par excellence. Soon after, I went and got his book, The Toy Collector, talk about dark. Yes, he's a novelist too. James Gunn had a very Troma sense of humor. You know, it was very, if you know Troma and you know those kinds of films, it was very much, you know, a very bawdy, very dirty, very New York sense of humor that a lot of people now hold against him. But it's like, at the time I got it and I thought he was fucking hilarious. But a lot of people now scream and yell and whatever. I mean, like, okay, I get it. But, you know, the adults are in the room and there's an adult sense of humor that has fallen out of favor in certain circles. But I enjoyed it, and I enjoyed his sense of humor. But what was interesting is he, of course, wrote the Scooby-Doo movies for Warner Brothers, proved that he could work at the studio level. He wrote Dawn of the Dead. That was Zack Snyder's big breakthrough feature film. And, of course, that's, you know, they've been friends since then, I would imagine. And now, after all the dust has settled, what is very interesting is we have 2 things happening. We are now 25 years into the modern superhero age, an age that has redefined Hollywood, an age that has made, I mean, Kevin Feige's probably even now still the most successful producer who's ever existed on planet Earth. The Infinity Saga, if you averaged out the box office grosses of all 23 of the first 3 phases and the Infinity Saga, they all grossed $1 billion. If you break it down, you add up all, divide by 23, they all made over $1 billion, which is insane. The average, even adjusted for inflation, insane. And now, of course, Fantastic Four is the 37th movie, 37 movies, which means, doing my math, that's 14 movies since the end of the Infinity Saga. And, you know, the Infinity Saga was great. I loved it, most of it, you know. For the most part, it held together really, really well. But phases 4, 5, and 6, not so much. It's been all over the place. You can talk about having to make content for Disney Plus and all that. It lost its focus. What I think really happened to not only was Marvel overextended, but they forgot their first principles. I talk a lot about first principles lately. But I'm not here to talk about Marvel. The thing that fascinated me is under David Zaslav, after AT&T, the merger, and everything that happened, and Marvel was acquired by Discovery Channel and became Warner Discovery. Of course, the really interesting thing happened was that David Zaslav created DC Studios. And, of course, Peter Safran and James Gunn took it over. And they were going to be the architects from the ground up of a brand new DC universe that was going to be planned from the get-go. And they have a 10-year plan. And, of course, the first part of this plan is the phase known as Gods and Monsters. And so far, it's been fascinating. So they have said their mandate was to make sure they didn't go into production on anything before the scripts were done, which always plagued the MCU. The iterative nature of changing scripts as they went along. It was working for them, just like it kind of was working for the Mission Impossible movies for the first two, Rogue Nation and Fallout, Chris McQuarrie's first two Mission Impossible movies. The iterative nature, making things up on the fly and to fit around the action sequences worked pretty well. Dead Reckoning and Mission Impossible, The Final Reckoning, not so much, although I enjoy the Mission Impossible movies as a whole. But you really, making stuff up as you go along is never a good idea, especially if you have an extended universe. And James Gunn has said over and over again that we're not going to make a movie until we're solid on our scripts. But what has happened now is, yes, we've seen Creature Commandos, which is an animated show, and Peacemaker, which began under different circumstances, is being sort of caressed into the new DC universe, which makes sense because it's a James Gunn production. I only hope maybe you can use Starro again. But I am a fan of James Gunn's work, and I've been a real fan of his work since he made his horror film, his horror comedy, Slither. And then he made a superhero movie called Super, which both of those movies, made for like $3 million, is what convinced Kevin Feige to bring him on board to make the Guardians of the Galaxy movies. And I think everyone would argue all three of those movies are very strong. It's a very strong trilogy. You took a bunch of characters that nobody knew and made you, by the end of Guardians 1, everybody fell in love with those characters. James Gunn really knows how to write that kind of thing, all the way back to his Tromo roots, writing Tromeo and Juliet. Now, if it's your thing, if it's not what you want, there's a lot of people that are like, okay, well, just because somebody can write one thing doesn't mean they can write another. Well, when James Gunn and Peter Safran were tapped to be co-heads of the studio, obviously, what are you going to go out the gate with to reconceptualize your DC universe, which was going to be conceived of as a universe from the beginning? Now, of course, why not lead with Superman? Henry Cavill never got to be they never got to do their own version of Superman. I was hoping Man of Steel would lead to Superman with Henry Cavill, but that didn't get to happen. And so let's bygones be bygones. They're going to start their new universe. So even before Superman is out, Supergirl has been shot based on the Tom King run, which I think is very, very smart. And we have, we don't know anything really much about it other than we've seen one photograph of Mr. Pierre and Mr. Chandler as Jon Stewart and Kyle Rayner. Our two Green Lanterns, Hal Jordan and, of course, Jon Stewart, and in civilian clothes walking down the street. So we've had lanterns, we have Supergirl, and we have Superman. A lot of money's been spent, and we haven't even seen, other than Creature Commandos, anything about the DC universe. What's it going to be like? We know that superheroes are already established in the world. We know that Earth understands that we are not alone in the universe. We know that, Superman's a Kryptonian. Is Hawkgirl from Thanagar? Don't know. I would imagine that there are other aliens on Earth. Obviously, the Green Lantern Corps exists. Guy Gardner is in the Justice Gang, Maxwell Lord's Justice Gang. So we know the Guardians are out there. We know the planet Oa is out there. I don't know if it's common knowledge. We'll have to see how it all works. But we know that for the very first time, we are getting a sort of a Silver Age super science vibe, which we've never really seen before. It's not a CW vibe. It's different than the CW, even though people have compared it to such. To me, it feels very much like the 80s DC universe, kind of the pre-crisis universe. And that's where we are at. Now, there are 2 articles written by the same guy off Medium that I want to share with you, to you, for you. But first, before I start reading the article, let me see if anybody's chimed in to say things. MTH sends in a super chat and says, Rob, how do you think the current 9 sexual misconduct allegations against Jared Leto will affect Tron, Ares, and Masters of the Universe? That is a good question. I do not know. I haven't heard much about it. Is he the allegations, or are they criminal allegations? I mean, obviously we're in a sort of a post-Me Too movement, the post-Johnny Depp Amber Heard universe. And of course, Jared Leto is the one thing he's a rock star. And he basically, my housemate, I was living with a friend of mine for a long time, platonically, we were just friends, but she was a big Jared Leto acolyte and was all part of the Camp Mars and the 30 Seconds to Mars. And it seemed like kind of a cult to me. So I don't know how it's going to play out. I have no idea. But look, I like Jared Leto as an actor. He's in a movie, a wonderful science fiction film not enough people have seen called Mr. Nobody that I would recommend everybody check out. But I really don't know much about the allegations against him. But they can't be great in the long run. Jurassic Joey has become a member of the channel. Thank you, Jurassic Joey. Major Chai Chai, our favorite Major Chai Chai, who's a real retired major, has been a member for 16 months. A performing artist says, I'm surprised they decided to do virtually the same material as Man of Steel. Metropolis is public, has Marvel Universe's behavior toward superheroes. Well, I can't speak to that because I haven't seen the movie yet. But I do think that there's certain touchstones to superhero films that they are going into. I don't think they're doing the same material. I think it's going to be a little bit different, but I can't speak to that because I have not seen it. So I would have to wait and see if that's true. But already, I mean, it's really interesting we know that the Justice Gang exists. We know that you have Mr. Terrific, you have Guy Gardner, and you have Hawkgirl. At least, maybe are there more people on the team? I don't know. Austrian Stories asked about what did I think of George Miller's Justice League script. I quite liked it. And I liked who they'd cast, and I liked the way the costumes looked, and I'm really sorry we didn't get to see it. I think, what was it, what's it called? Justice League Mortal? Is that what it was? I would have loved to see that. I love George Miller as a filmmaker. But anyway, here is the article that I wanted to start with. And again, this was from Medium. It's written by Nick Hart. And the article is, what will happen? My time to shine. Hello, tweeted box office total for the year 2024, which came in at $8.72 billion, down 3% from $9 billion in 2023. The numbers were disappointing for major studios, but actually slightly better than some of the more dire predictions. Warner Brothers in particular have had a rocky ride since 2020, and the lack of financial stability was a major factor in the decision for their parent company, Warner Media, to merge with Discovery Inc. in April of 2022. Since the beginning of the pandemic, Warner Brothers have only produced a single film that has grossed over $1 billion at the global box office, Greta Gerwig's Barbie. This is quite a step down. Minecraft almost made it, though. This is quite a step down for the studio that was consistently topping domestic and global charts just over a decade ago with franchises like Harry Potter and Christopher Nolan's Dark Knight trilogy. In 2024, Warner Brothers did have 2 films that ended up in the global top 10, Dune Part 2 and Godzilla x Kong: The New Empire, although neither of them grossed over $300 million domestic or $750 million worldwide. Last year also saw several high-profile flops for the studio, notably Furiosa, a Mad Max saga, taking in the lowest Memorial Day weekend opening in 30 years, and Joker, Folie à Deux, grossing 81% less than the first Joker film. Ouch. Both of these films received 0 Oscar nominations, despite the previous entries in their respective franchises being darlings with the Academy. In comparison, Disney, who had a horrible 2023, ran laps around Warner Brothers in 2024, releasing the top 3 films of the year, Inside Out 2, Deadpool and Wolverine, and Moana 2, all of which grossed over $1 billion at the global box office. Because of this, the pressure for Superman to make at least $1 billion at the global box office is almost unspeakably high. The film will be the first theatrical release from Warner Bros. Discovery's newly minted DC Studios and will kick off the new DC Universe, a cinematic universe that will hopefully give Warner Bros. The chance that they have always wanted to compete with Marvel Studios and their MCU. Not only did James Gunn write and direct the film, but he's also the co-CEO of DC Studios, along with his longtime collaborator and producer, Peter Safran. So, what will happen if it winds up being a complete and total failure? Although Warner Brothers have been taking some serious losses in the past few years, their financial survival has been ensured partially due to a series of radical cost-cutting measures that were implemented after the Discovery merger. When former Discovery CEO David Zaslav took over the new conglomerate, he quickly decided to throw out several fully completed Warner Brothers films in order to get a massive tax write-off. HBO shows such as the Martin Scorsese-produced Vinyl were also removed entirely from HBO Max in order to save money on web hosting. DC Studios is one of the few things Zaslav has created rather than destroyed since taking the reins of WBD, which seems to indicate he has faith that it will indeed perform well. James Gunn is a proven quantity, having written and directed the acclaimed and lucrative Guardians of the Galaxy trilogy at Marvel Studios, although none of those films ever broke $1 billion at the global box office. However, they did make collectively over $2 billion. The biggest thing that Gunn has going for him is 25 years plus of experience working as a creative on Hollywood genre films. When appearing on former Lex Luthor actor Michael Rosenbaum, star of my own audio drama True Noir, that I, of course, directed, produced, edited, which you can now get at truenoir.co, podcast in June of 2023, Gunn revealed that the idea of running DC Studios on his own had been floated in the past by Warner leadership, but he was not interested in. He only accepted the offer after they came up with the idea to have a co-CEO arrangement with Peter Safran, where Gunn would handle the creative side of things and Safran would handle more of the business and production duties. Given this configuration, the 58-year-old Gunn now has far more creative control and industry experience than his former employer and potential future competitor Kevin Feige did when he became president of Marvel Studios. Feige started his career as an assistant to super producer Lauren Schuler Donner after she hired him while he was still attending film school at USC. Lauren was the wife of the late Richard Donner, who kicked off the modern cinematic superhero genre with 1978's Superman the movie. The couple acted as mentors to the young Feige, allowing him to score his first associate producer credit at only 27 years old on Bryan Singer's X-Men, which was produced by the Donners. Conversely, James Gunn got to start working at transgressive low-budget production house Troma Studios, working on the script for such classics as Tromeo and Juliet. His first brush with the comic book movie genre came in 2000 when he wrote the script for the superhero spoof The Specials, which was directed by future Chernobyl and Last of Us showrunner Craig Mazin, which, of course, I was an associate producer on, or the associate producer. After that, Gunn spent years balancing the creation of alternative comedy short films and TV shows with scriptwriting gigs for successful mainstream fare like the live-action Scooby-Doo movies and Zack Snyder's 2004 directorial debut, The Dawn of the Dead remake. By the time that Feige hired him to write and direct Guardians of the Galaxy at Marvel Studios, he'd written and directed 2 independent, very violent films, the horror comedy Slither and the incredibly dark superhero comedy Super. Neither of these were big hits at all, grossing a combined $13 million worldwide between the two of them. Here's James Gunn and, of course, Zack Snyder. So it came as a massive surprise to just about everyone that Guardians opened at $94 million in the US in August of 2014, grossing only $4 million less than the first Iron Man made in its opening weekend 6 years prior. By the time it finished its run, the first Guardians film had grossed over $770 million worldwide, approximately 60 times as much as Slither, which had previously been Gunn's highest-grossing feature. While many other independent filmmakers had seen varying degrees of success when transitioning from micro-budgeted films to massive superhero franchises, Gunn quickly proved himself to be a bona fide hitmaker at the ripe old young age of 47 years old. He received praise from critics and moviegoers alike for his ability to balance genuine emotion with some of the more outlandish elements of comic book mythology. His winning streak continued with Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 2, outgrossing the first film, as well as an executive producer credit on two of the highest-grossing films of all time, Avengers Infinity War and Avengers Endgame. In 2018, he picked a fight with some right-wing agitators on Twitter, who then went back through his account and found various offensive tweets from his edgy comedy days in which he joked about topics like 9/11 and pedophilia. One of these tweets resurfaced. The scandal was enough to get him fired from Disney before he was able to begin production on Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3. Although he was reinstated by Disney Marvel less than 8 months after his firing, he had already taken the time to go sign a contract to write and direct The Suicide Squad over at Warner Brothers, which quickly led to a spin-off with Peacemaker for their fledgling HBO Max streaming service. The release of The Suicide Squad was bungled by a resurgent COVID variant, as well as Warner Brothers' controversial decision to release all of their 2021 releases on HBO Max the same day as the film's theatrical release. But Peacemaker turned out to be a massive hit for the streaming service, with its season finale breaking Max's single-day viewership record in early 2022. Later that same year, Warner Brothers Discovery announced their deal with Gunn to become co-CEO and chairman of DC Studios. While the sacrificial lamb of Batgirl was partially justified by Zaslav claiming that he wanted to reorient the studio's priority toward theatrical releases for their biggest intellectual properties, Gunn painted a slightly different picture when he was finally able to reveal some details about the studio's plan. In a YouTube video from January 2023, where he laid out some of the plans for the first chapter of the DC Universe, Gunn explained, "One of our jobs, mine and Peter's, is to come in and make sure that the DC Universe is connected in film, television, gaming, and animation." Now, I'm going to stop right there. What I find really interesting about that is that there was a lot of talk about what they called transmedia. And I think one of the, how you could tie in, we saw it back in the 90s, we saw it with Shadows of the Empire. You know, the Star Wars project Shadows of the Empire. You had a novel, you had a video game, you had comics, you had all these spin-offs. What you didn't have was a movie. And then, of course, with The Matrix, they had a video game, Enter the Matrix, you know, where then they had the Animatrix, and they were trying to make all of this stuff work together as transmedia. The problem is, at least the way I see it, the idea is sound, but the creators of these things, video games are very different than movies. Movies are very different than writing, say, novels, and they're not considered the same by the people working on them or the people paying for them. So the idea of transmedia makes sense because you look at all the different spin-offs and things like that, but does it work in practice? I mean, what's really interesting now is the quiet king of franchises, Steve Asbell, over at 20th Century Studios. We saw, by the way, The Predator, Killer of Killers, a new animated film, dropped on Hulu yesterday. I loved it. I've seen it twice now. I think it's terrific. And of course, that was a spin-off of their Hulu show. They made a Predator movie for Hulu called Prey. Dan Trachtenberg, who's now the architect of these things. They have Predator Badlands, a new live-action movie coming out. The Alien franchise, while Steve, I don't think, was involved in Noah Hawley's Alien Earth, but now we've got Alien Earth. You have Alien Romulus. We've got Alien Earth is coming, and we're going to have Alien Romulus 2 and whatever else is going on. We are moving toward more of a transmedia world, even though they're not calling it that. And the DC universe is a transmedia universe as well. So you've got Peacemaker, you have Creature Commandos, we're going to get the Lantern series, and we're going to have movies. Now, what's interesting about all that is, to me, all of that sounds very promising, but then you have to make sure it's all good. And in order to make things good, you have to have people at the top that know what's good, as opposed to, say, the people in control of, Star Trek. Yeesh, they dropped season 3 Strange New Worlds trailer today. No, I'm not going to do a rant about it, but you can imagine between the episode titles and what we saw in that trailer, let's just say my favorite franchise is no longer for me. I'll just say that. But the idea of a transmedia world is an interesting one. But again, you still need people that know what they're doing, that understand the stories they're telling and how they work. And the problem is there aren't a lot of people that do, unfortunately. So it's a risk either way. Now, of all the people, I think James Gunn is probably, with his experience, with the things that he likes, he's proven himself. I mean, Peacemaker, The Suicide Squad, and all 3 Guardians of the Galaxy movies definitely have James Gunn's sensibility. And it is still mired and steeped in that trauma humor, that dark humor, the black humor, and I don't mean black as in race, I mean dark humor, the way that Stanley Kubrick's Dr. Strangelove is a black comedy. That dark kind of humor that a lot of people, especially these days, irony and dark humor is not necessarily sardonic. It doesn't play well with the masses. A lot of people don't understand it, and it makes them uncomfortable. But just because you've been doing that, I've always believed that a great filmmaker, Stanley Kubrick being my favorite director of all time, could work in many different genres. He could make a comedy like Lolita, talk about an old man going after a young girl. Lolita's your movie. But he could make Spartacus. He could make a crime thriller like The Killing. Then he could make one of the great black comedies, one of the great comedies, one of the great movies of all time, Dr. Strangelove. Then he can go make a cosmic epic in 2001. Then he can go back and make A Clockwork Orange based on Anthony Burgess's Future Shock novel, and a movie that was insane. And then go back and do William Makepeace Thackeray's Barry Lyndon. And then, of course, do The Shining. I mean, he can do everything. A great storyteller can work in all different genres if they know what they're doing. Great storytellers are not just relegated to one simple genre. They can do everything. I mean, John Carpenter made Assault on Precinct 13 before he made Halloween and The Fog. And before that, he'd made Dark Star. And then he went and made Escape from New York, The Thing, Christine. He had a lot of horror in there, but I mean, Escape from New York was very different than The Fog. And Escape from New York was also very different than The Thing. And then he could make something like Starman. So great filmmakers can work in many different genres. Cronenberg is another big, I'm just a big fan of that. So the idea that James Gunn is coming out of the gate with Superman, 1, it makes sense. But 2, he also had to do something new and different. And the idea of, obviously, he's a huge fan of 80s DC, as am I. I mean, that's when I started religiously going to the comic book store in the early 80s. When, Frank Miller's Ronin and Camelot 3000 were being published. And I was, buying Moon Knight and Micronauts and Khazar, because those are the first 3 direct sale books that Marvel had in comic book stores. But anyway, so transmedia. And now let's get back to this article. Again, this article was in Medium. So far, much of what he discussed in that video has come to pass, with some notable exceptions. This is James Gunn. The animated Max series Creature Commandos was released as planned and to great critical acclaim and impressive streaming numbers, and Superman is flying full speed ahead toward the release date it was originally announced with. It hasn't been delayed. DC Studios also managed to absorb the distribution rights of the excellent CNN Films documentary Superman, the Christopher Reeve story, late in 2024, technically becoming the studio's first theatrical release, although in very limited run before it went to streaming, but there have been some stumbles along the way. In his original YouTube address, James Gunn claimed that a Waller TV show centered around Viola Davis's character from the Suicide Squad films and Peacemaker would come in between Creature Commandos and Superman. As of yet, this show has failed to materialize, with Variety reporting in February of 2025 that Gunn told reporters it had been a bumpy road to get the script right, especially after a new season of Peacemaker ended up going into production first. Similarly, a Booster Gold TV show has stalled after one particular creator, rumored by some scoopers to be Danny McBride. Danny McBride, who, by the way, he did a recent interview with NPR about his the latest season of his show, initially expressed interest before getting cold feet. There's also The Authority, an obscure property that focuses on more brutal and violent superheroes, which means it would most likely be rated R if it was to be turned into a film as was originally announced. That this film is delayed isn't surprising to me, as I'm sure Zaslav and company are probably waiting to see if Superman performs well enough for them to greenlight a massive budget for such a niche IP. The horror-tinged Swamp Thing is also currently in limbo due to its attached director James Mangold having to prioritize the awards cycle around his own nominated A Complete Unknown. By all accounts, the studio is still very bullish on Superman, and internal test screenings have gone over quite well. Peacemaker will be back on the air soon, as will a second season of Creature Commandos. While The Authority and Swamp Thing are currently idling, the first season of HBO Max's TV show Lanterns is already deep in production, as is the next theatrical DC Studios release, Cruella director Craig Gillespie's Supergirl Woman of Tomorrow, which we know has wrapped. One of the more surprising developments in recent months was that a horror drama centered around a tragic Batman villain, Clayface, has leapfrogged over several projects from the original slate and now appears on track to be released next year. Despite Gunn saying there were initially no plans for a solo Clayface movie, when acclaimed horror writer-director Mike Flanagan turned in a strong script, they decided to greenlight the film and give it priority over similar projects like Swamp Thing. With a reportedly low budget and director James Watkins, director of 2024's Speak No Evil remake, already attached, it seems that Clayface is being fast-tracked due to it being a more stable investment than something as risky as The Authority. Now, that might have been changed. Remember, this article's from a few months ago. The current contract with James Gunn and Peter Safran has been reported to go from 2022 to 2026, so the chances of renewal and completion of those unfinished projects will depend on how much of a profit Superman can turn. A recent report from Puck stated that Zaslav was unhappy with how Warner Brothers Pictures co-chiefs Mike DeLuca and Pam Abdy are running things, and that he is rumored to be considering putting Safran in charge of the studio instead. Given that Gunn said he was only interested in running DC Studios with the help of Safran, this raises a lot of questions. Now, let me point out, I would be remiss if I did not do this, but Warner Brothers' fortunes have changed over the last 3 months. 3 pictures that Pam Abdy and Mike DeLuca greenlit have been doing bang-up business. The first, Minecraft, almost grossed $1 billion. The second, Sinners, Ryan Coogler's movie that was made for a reported $90 million, maybe a little bit more, has grossed, maybe it's up to over $350 million worldwide, which is a huge thing for a non-IP original movie, made for a fairly niche market, but terrific film, in my opinion. And, of course, reviving the Final Destination series over at New Line with producer Craig Perry. I said Steve Perry in the show, on John's show, but Craig Perry, who's been there. I mean, that was a great idea, and that movie has smoked at the box office more so than any Final Destination movie ever had. So they have 3 winners in a row. March, April, May saw Pam Abdy and Mike DeLuca's fortunes certainly turn around at the studio. Also, they hosted their CinemaCon presentation, which that was kind of a vote of confidence for them. And I'm really pulling for them, so let's see what they can do. And if Superman's a hit, they have another movie in August coming out called Weapons. That is the second film from Zach Kreger, who made Barbarian. And I am really looking forward to Weapons. I may or may not have read the script. And Weapons is, wait till you see it. Gunn himself has not shied away from talking about the concept of superhero fatigue, which refers to the fact that after Avengers Endgame, most superhero films have struggled to make the impact they used to at the box office. When speaking to Rolling Stone in 2023, he said, "I think there is such a thing as superhero fatigue. I think it doesn't have anything to do with superheroes. It has to do with the kind of stories that get to be told." In 2024, Marvel Studios' Deadpool and Wolverine did come in second place at the global box office for the year, but it was the only comic book movie to break the top 10. Meanwhile, Joker Folie was an unmitigated disaster. Venom: The Last Dance was the lowest grossing film of its trilogy, and Madam Web has long since been erased from the collective consciousness. I don't know, I think Madam Web is something we love to still hit in the face if we can. The numbers of the year before were even worse. Gunn's own Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3 being the highest grossing superhero film of 2023 and still performing worse than Volume 2 did in 2017. Marvel Studios suffered two other embarrassing flops with Ant-Man and the Wasp: Quantumania and The Marvels, the latter being their lowest performing film ever. Meanwhile, Warner Bros. Discovery initially hedged all their bets on their newly anointed DC studios and dumped all their remaining pre-merger DC films into theaters with very little promotion, meaning that between four films, Shazam 2, The Flash, Blue Beetle, and Aquaman 2, they earned less than $1 billion US worldwide combined. Yeesh. So far, 2025 isn't looking too great for comic book movies either. If Julius Onah's Captain America: Brave New World is any indication, the film has generated a respectable $370 million at the global box office, but has the lowest average Rotten Tomatoes and IMDb rankings of any films in the Cap series thus far, and may wind up as its lowest grossing entry as well. Spoiler alert, it has. If Marvel Studios' next effort, Thunderbolts, is poorly received, it was all right. It was, in terms of its reception, I like the movie. And Superman has anything less than 90% on Rotten Tomatoes when it opens, I think you will see that fabled superhero fatigue kicking in. The only way I see, meaning the author, the only way I see generating enough hype to crack $200 million or close to that on opening U.S. weekend would be renewed interest in superheroes in general and a Rotten Tomatoes critic score of 95% or higher. If the film is to eventually get to $1 billion and justify direct sequels, it will also probably need to be good enough that people go see it multiple times in the theater. James Gunn has repeatedly stated that under his studio arrangement, he has very little creative oversight, which I find very promising, considering I'm a fan of his writing. But if Superman is at all divisive or considered too weird for general audiences, it is incredibly likely that the Man of Steel will never headline his own film ever again. It is also very likely that DC Studios will come under new leadership that will run things in a much more conventional, boring fashion with endless versions of Batman and the Joker instead of sinking money into more interesting and unique DC properties. Think about the obvious course correction and creative meddling that happened within Lucasfilm after The Last Jedi was released. Now imagine if that had been the reaction to The Force Awakens instead. As much as a part of me would like to see Gunn return to horror and or low-budget independent filmmaking, I'm also very eager to see what a superhero cinematic universe could look like under a genuinely creative and passionate filmmaker rather than a bunch of career producers. By the way, now I'm not saying this, the author of this article is saying this, but I totally agree with this sentiment. I'm going to read it again. As much as a large part of me, and this I mean myself here too, would like to see James Gunn return to horror and or low-budget independent filmmaking, I am also very eager to see what a superhero cinematic universe could look like under a genuinely creative and passionate filmmaker rather than a bunch of career producers. This is not to say or throw shade at any other filmmakers, but in this case, James Gunn also controls, well, the studio that he works for. So it's very interesting. David Zaslav is an incredibly shrewd businessman who spent most of his career producing reality television and has also made very little effort to disguise his obviously right-wing political leanings. He's reportedly shown that he will throw away films he doesn't care about, including Coyote vs. Acme, a film that was co-written by Gunn himself well after he had given Gunn the job of running a studio for him. James Gunn and Peter Safran have been given a historic opportunity, which is to tell the biggest story ever told. But if their first film fails, you can expect to see multiversal cameos, disconnected storytelling, and endless reboots forever. Or maybe the genre will just dissipate entirely. The entire future of the DC brand and potentially superhero films in general may very well be decided on July 11th, 2025. Now, I just want to say that this article appeared in Medium. It was written by Nick Hart, and it was published on March 14th, 2025. Whenever I read articles, I do put a link down in the description along where the tip link is, so you can find both of the articles I'm going to read. Nick Hart has written another article. I just wanted to read that article because I thought it was a pretty good encapsulation of the last few years, and it kind of laid out everything and had actual quotes from James Gunn, and so everyone's always throwing this stuff out there. What do I think about it all? I think he's absolutely right on the money. I mean, I think that if this doesn't work, why am I excited about Superman? Well, I'm always excited, first and foremost, about authorship. When I'm seeing something, it doesn't necessarily have to be an auteur director, a writer-director, which writer-directors are those I generally consider to be the auteurs. Now, my favorite directors don't necessarily have to write. Kubrick usually collaborated with, when he wanted to adapt Lolita, he got the author of the book, Vladimir Nabokov, to work with him. And he did that whenever he could. Jim Thompson on The Killing. So the thing is, we all want the same thing, which is we want to see great movies. I don't care what kind of movies I'm seeing, but I've loved superhero films. I've loved superhero comics. I'm surrounded. I mean, you can see this level here as I stretch out. Like, keep that one there, keep that one there. All around me at this level, it's all omnibuses and absolute editions and hardcovers and thousands and tens of thousands of pages of comic art and comic books in this Robservatory here with me. And I want to see great movies. Now, here's the thing. For me, as a kid, I grew up with George Reeves. George Reeves from the 50s, The Adventures of Superman, was my favorite. I loved it. Before I saw Superman the movie, of course. But when I was a kid, I loved Superman. I hadn't seen the Kirk Allan serials that were made before The Adventures of Superman, but I loved that. And then growing up, I got Christopher Reeve, of course. He made 3 movies. And then he made the 4th movie with Canon. He made 3 movies at Warner Brothers, and the 4th movie was made Canon Films. I have no idea. I'd love to. One day I should look up the account of how did Canon get to make Superman 4: The Quest for Peace. But, so you had 4 Christopher Reeve movies, and then you had, of course, the Superboy TV show that had 2 different Superboys that the Salkinds were milking their Superman rights. And then, of course, we had Lois and Clark, The New Adventures of Superman, which, by the way, they just announced they're going to release the series on Blu-ray, which is pretty cool. And then, of course, moving forward, whether it's Smallville, we've seen the Superman character over the last better part of, since there was a 20-year break, but since 78, depicted the 90s. We've always seen different depictions of Superman. So I'm really curious. I mean, while I really did enjoy Henry Cavill as Superman, I thought he was a great Superman. I never thought he got to be in a really, truly great movie that was his. And I really would have liked to have seen that. I mean, I do love Man of Steel. But as I've said, I don't think Man of Steel is a great movie. I love it, but it falls short in certain departments. It is, I know people like certain sequences, but in terms of a storyline that really resonates and really stays with you, I think that, it left me a little cold. As much as I love the movie, it left me cold. And so I really appreciate this sort of the direction James Gunn is taking this franchise and where it's going to go. And I think that, look, if there's one thing I've learned in my life, you can read as many reviews as you want. Nothing ever replaces the actual act of sitting down and watching a movie. I've read 20 reviews of a movie, and then I've gone into a theater and I've watched a film and I've been surprised by it. Because everything about a movie, if you're a movie lover, everything about the movie interests you. Like if the logo, for instance, comes on the screen, is the Warner Brothers logo going to turn into the Superman shield? You know, who knows? And then how does the music sound? Everything when you're watching a movie, it doesn't matter if you know the reviews or you know the plot or whatever, the twists, the fucking post-credit scene. It doesn't matter what you know about a movie. When you actually sit down to watch it, no matter what you know about it, is not nearly as insightful or enjoyable as actually watching the movie unfold. Sometimes the more you know about the movie, it creates an unfair expectation in you that doesn't allow you to appreciate what you actually saw as much. I mean, I will say that. You should never judge a movie by what it's not. You can only judge a movie by what it is, but you've already had a lot of preconceived notions. It's hard to get away from that. I understand that entirely. I am incredibly interested in seeing what does it feel like to watch James Gunn's Superman? What is it going to be like? I honestly don't know. I know a little bit of the tone of the film, and I love this tone. I love it. It's a very different tone than we've ever seen. It's certainly different from the Marvel Cinematic Universe, and it's much more fantastical, which I like, but it's not stupid fantastical. But it is much more, or maybe much less grounded than, say, Donner's Superman and Superman Returns. The fact that you have all this super science that I guess Lex Luthor can make kaiju, you know, and he's got his pocket universe, and there's all kinds of crazy super science, very much right out of the DC universe. Is that going to work? Are people going to buy it? I don't know. I mean, I really don't know. As somebody who's read comic books all my life, you know, and especially read different takes on Superman, you know, the ongoing books, of course. It's very funny. People forget the other day somebody was saying something about Jimmy Olsen's a worthless character. And I was like, you do know that Darkseid was introduced in the pages of Superman's pal Jimmy Olsen, right? That like Jack Kirby began the entire fourth world basically in a Jimmy Olsen comic book, right? So, you know, and that's true, by the way. So it's like, it depends. Again, every character, just like every movie, is one step away from a great creator coming in and making a character or making a franchise great again. And it's true. And what you need is, the great thing about James Gunn is you might disagree, but he has a vision. He has a very clear vision, and you can see that from what we've seen. And I have to say, we haven't seen very much. If you went to CinemaCon, you saw a little bit more. And what we saw at CinemaCon was really interesting. There was another scene in The Fortress of Solitude that actually made me laugh out loud. You know, and I understand, is putting crypto in the movie a clever way to curry favor with certain parts of the audience? Sure. Was crypto written out of Superman continuity after the Crisis on Infinite Earths? Yes. But that doesn't mean that we don't love our crypto. And if they can make it all work, and that, again, it fits in with the tone of what James Gunn is going for. I'm going to be very curious to how the Justice Gang is put in there, because if it's too much, if it's too The Suicide Squad or too Peacemaker, I don't think it's going to work. You still have to have that sweeping feel. Dun-dun. You have to have that feel. And whether you're hearing the Hans Zimmer score or, you know, basically the John Williams score, which is, of course, synonymous with Superman, is it going to work? Is it going to work? I don't know. I think it is going to work. The more I see from the film, the way it looks, the things that happen in the movie, I know that for me, it's going to be like catnip. But the imagery doesn't mean it's going to hang together. It comes down to story and character. It's not about the universe. It looks like the universe is a very interesting universe I want to spend time in. And it's a universe where Green Lantern powers work, and Mr. Terrific works, and Hawkgirl. Is Hawkgirl from Thanagar? You know, I don't know. Is Kater Hole in this movie? Does she talk to him on the phone? I have no idea. Which version is it? Which version of Hawk Girl is it? I don't know. Why does she work for Maxwell Lord? Don't know. I think we're going to find out. I have many questions. Why are the 2 Green Lanterns on Earth walking down the street? Why aren't they flying in their uniforms? Don't know that either, but that's not part of the movie. What's the Supergirl cameo going to be like? Is it going to be in the post-credit scene? I have no idea. I have a million questions about this movie. But you know what's great about it? Is my million questions are going to be answered in just a little over a month when Superman opens on July 11th. And I am totally excited about seeing this movie. I'm really excited about it. If nothing else, it looks so much fun. It looks like it's going to be wildly entertaining. And as far as I'm concerned, like I have no fealty to anything that came before this. You know, I'm just hoping that this particular movie and that the DC universe is established. I hope a flag is firmly planted where I'm excited about seeing these other movies. Because make no mistake, if this movie fails, there's going to be no more DC universe. We'll get our Supergirl movie. We'll get Peacemaker Season 2, and we'll probably get Lanterns. They'll finish that stuff off. But if Superman doesn't work, that's it. That's it. They're going to throw in the towel. They will. Because there's no reason to keep it going. Now, here's the thing. That's kind of why I like this so much. The stakes are enormous. And I love that. I love that James Gunn has gone all in on his own creativity. And his partner, Peter Safran, they've been working together for 25 years, not longer. They're all in. The pot is there. You know, they're in front of Le Chiffre. You're like, James Bond, you better not lose all the money. You better not lose the Americans' money now. You lost the British. Now you've got your American money. You don't want to lose it. And for that alone, for this big swing, I love to see that. What's more American than that? A big swing. We shall see. Now I have another article that kind of explains something and why I think that James Gunn there's a reason that he's going to win on this one that we shall see. Major Chai Chai says, a big hello and welcome back to fellow imagination connoisseur Thomas Patoli. You have been greatly missed. Kisses. Well, Thomas, you heard it from the Major. You got kisses from her. DUI Champ says, my only problem with James Gunn is the cruelty to animals. Gunning down Rocket's 4 friends in the last Guardians movie pissed me off. I'm afraid to see what he does to Crypto. No tolerance for animal abuse. Well, I think Crypto can hold his own. But you're right. But then again, the entirety of Guardians 3 was about the abuse of animals and about the abuse of sentient beings. You know, he was not a good guy. Mandatory, a performing artist, says Sasha Calle is Supergirl in a cross-dimension story, and Gal Gadot's Wonder Woman theme music needs to be salvaged. Losing both are tragic. I love Sasha Calle as Supergirl. Loved her. She was great. It was kind of a bummer. But yeah, totally. Major Chai Chai says, finish the first Hyperion Canto. That's Dan Simmons' Hyperion novels that are some of my favorite, at least the first 2, Hyperion and Fall of Hyperion, which are written as one book, are 2 of my favorite science fiction novels of all time. Major Chai Chai says, I finished the first Hyperion Canto. Amazing how relevant the book is to today regarding AI and humanity's place in the universe. Truly a timeless tale. I'm glad you're enjoying it. I would never steer you wrong when it comes to books. Mario Lopez, how's your mom doing, Mario? Member for 50 months. 50 months. Mario comes to us from Portugal. Major Chai Chai says, right now I'm still excited to see Superman. I don't understand not being excited to see Superman. We're getting a new Superman movie with some big stakes behind it. And Rachel Brosnahan. And another thing that I would like to point out is that of all the superhero movies that have been made, this movie spent the most time doing what's called chemistry tests, where they put actors together to act before they're cast to see who works best together. They spent months casting this movie, which is another reason that I'm excited, because this cast, whether it's Jimmy Olsen, all these actors clearly vibe together. So we are going to get, if nothing else, an incredible cast of performers. And I think that that's also something to be excited about. I really do. And I'm excited about that for that reason. Tatman12 says, Rob, I just finished reading the prequel junior novel to the Superman movie, not written by Gunn, but if the film is anything like it, I think we're in for a treat. The characters are portrayed perfectly. I didn't know that there was a prequel junior novel to the Superman movie, but that's reassuring because that person probably had access to the script, which is a very good thing. Now, here's another article that was written by Nick Hart, and it was published on May 24th, 2025, once again in Medium. Link is down below. And I thought this was a really interesting article. And it kind of describes a director and what superpower or what previous experience, I just said superpower to be cheeky, but what do a number of these big budget successful directors have in common about directing superhero movies? And you're about to find out. And again, this is according to Nick Hart. And this was in Medium on May 24th, 2025. Why are horror directors so good at making superhero movies? What's so scary about spandex? With great power comes great financial responsibility. Here's a fun fact you might not know about James Wan. In addition to being today's most commercially successful horror director, he is also the only filmmaker in history to have directed 2 separate films for 2 separate studios that each grossed $1 billion or more at the global box office. And neither of them are horror films. They are, in fact, Furious 7, 2014 for Universal, and Aquaman for Warner Brothers. Oscar winner Christopher Nolan, who directed 2 Batman movies for Warner Brothers that grossed almost as much as Batman, nearly became the second man to accomplish this unique feat when Oppenheimer grossed $975 million for Universal. To date, James Wan's first Aquaman movie is the single highest grossing DC superhero film of all time, with $1.15 billion worldwide. So what is it about Wan that makes him such a box office juggernaut? Is it the exact same thing that makes thriller directors like Christopher Nolan so good at making superhero films? The same qualities also present in filmmakers that started in horror, such as Richard Donner, because remember, what movie did Richard Donner direct before he made Superman? The Omen. James Gunn. Richard Donner and James Gunn, a precise control of heightened tone and an understanding of the economics of filmmaking. Horror movies traditionally are made on lower budgets, but you have a heightened tone at the same time. While indie filmmakers who create beloved romantic comedies and heartfelt dramas often find themselves fighting with Marvel Studios for creative control, the complexities of directing low-budget horror movies early on in one's career often teach young and ambitious genre filmmakers how to deliver demanding productions on time and under budget without compromising their artistic vision. For a 2002 interview leading up to the release of Spider-Man, director Sam Raimi told a BBC reporter, "I never had anything to do with a film before where people were so interested in it while we were actually making it." Raimi's passion for Spider-Man is legendary at this point, as is the spectacular burnout he eventually experienced as the series wore on. Initially, Sony had more proven mainstream filmmakers in mind, with David Fincher and James Cameron famously courted for the gig. The latter did engage in serious talks with the studio and got close to casting Leonardo DiCaprio in the role, but due to complicated rights issues, Cameron reportedly wanting to take the film in a darker direction, it never materialized. But Sam Raimi brought something to the table which is perhaps less common in Hollywood franchise adaptations than many would think. A fully formed pitch formed around a very specific direction he wanted to take the character. After spending much of the 90s directing more somber and serious thrillers like A Simple Plan and The Gift, Raimi wanted to get back into genre filmmaking and thus began lobbying Sony to sign him on to direct the web-slinging's live-action debut. His take was to pivot away from the self-seriousness and black leather that was so prominent in the Batman, X-Men, and Blade franchises at the time, and instead crafting something that was colorful, earnest, and brimming with romantic melodrama. Raimi had previously flirted with the superhero genre in 1990's Darkman, a strange, forgotten gem, well, not so forgotten, that was released between the second and third installments of the Evil Dead trilogy. In it, Liam Neeson plays a scientist who is horribly disfigured during an attempted murder and decides to seek revenge against his would-be killers. Released the same time as Warren Beatty's ill-fated Dick Tracy adaptation, Darkman was a similarly wacky and occasionally nightmarish piece of bizarro noir that also failed to light the box office. Failed to light the box office alight? Oh, okay. It does say that. It did, however, generate a respectable $49 million at the worldwide box office on a meager budget of $8 million, and was a completely original idea despite having obvious comic book influences, particularly from Marvel's Strange Tales era, which was directly inspired by the monster movies produced by Universal at the same studio that would go on to finance Darkman. Meanwhile, Dick Tracy did a solid $162 million worldwide, but after Disney had shelled out $47 million for the film's production budget, they were certainly hoping for something closer to the gargantuan $400 million that Tim Burton's Batman grossed for Warner Brothers the year prior on a smaller budget. When it came time to talk Spider-Man with Sony, Sam Raimi had Darkman in his pocket as a proof of concept. Following Batman, the 90s saw Hollywood trying to ape that film's success with a series of high-profile and high-budget pulpy flops like The Shadow and The Phantom, both of which grossed less than Raimi's original Darkman. Combined with his experience squeezing seemingly endless creativity out of shoestring budgets on the beloved Evil Dead trilogy, which already commanded legions of nerds, Sony eventually decided that Sam Raimi did indeed have what it took to translate Marvel's flagship character to the big screen. It ended up being one of the most consequential decisions in franchise filmmaking history. In 2002, Spider-Man opened to an unprecedented $114 million domestically, shattering the record that the first Harry Potter film had set with $90 million in its first weekend the year before. After a rocky 90s, Sam Raimi proved to the world the same lesson that Hollywood should have learned 25 years prior when Richard Donner followed up The Omen with Superman. Horror directors know how to please nerds, because they are nerds. But I would dare say they're imagination connoisseurs. In only a matter of weeks, Superman will be back on the silver screen, shepherded into theaters yet again by a director who got his start in horror filmmaking, director James Gunn. Earlier this year, I wrote a lengthy article about how just important this movie will be for the superhero film market. That's how I found this article that I just read to you. As recent years have seen the genre no longer being the guaranteed cash cow it once was. In that piece, I talked about how Gunn is following in the footsteps of his friend and colleague Zack Snyder, yet another director who started with horror before moving to comic book movies and eventually being saddled with overseeing a DC cinematic universe meant to rival Marvel Studios. While I do enjoy some of Snyder's work, I always found his superhero films dour, overlong, and needlessly convoluted. This is especially true when you compare a film like Batman v Superman to the frenetic energy and ruthless efficiency on display in his 2004 debut, Dawn of the Dead, the Dawn of the Dead remake, which was scripted by none other than James Gunn. That being said, one of the strongest sequences in Batman v Superman is the terrifying first appearance of Ben Affleck's Dark Knight, which is a scene that absolutely benefits from Snyder's horror experience. In many ways, what we've seen this far of Gunn's version of The Last Son of Krypton seems to have more in common with Sam Raimi's colorful, saccharine rendition of Spider-Man than it does with Snyder's cynical take on a depressed Man of Steel and a murderous Batman. While Gunn and Warner Brothers appear to be playing it safe in some respects, resurrecting John Williams' score, using Lex Luthor as a villain again, what has me most excited is how much they seem to be willing to lean into the truly weird aspects of DC mythology, including kaiju, obscure secondary heroes and villains, and the long-awaited live-action feature debut of Superman's beloved companion, Krypto the Superdog. All of this makes me think of James Wan's Aquaman, a film which The Atlantic's film critic David Sims once affectionately described as being written by Atlanteans on cocaine on an episode of his podcast Blank Check. Within the first 10 minutes of Aquaman, you have, by the way, I was on another stream and I do have this die-cast, this is his trident, just saying. I mean, it's 6 scale, but it's his. Within the first 10 minutes of Aquaman, you have the Queen of Atlantis, played by Nicole Kidman, fighting men in glowing suits, shooting water lasers, followed by her delivering the line, "Where I come from, the sea carries our tears away." As much as I enjoyed Thunderbolts and found its commentary on mental health and trauma to be surprisingly meaty, I would much rather watch a superhero movie that feels like it was written by Kryptonians on cocaine, directed by the guy who started his career by writing Tromeo and Juliet. Fucking men. If you needed another reason to be excited for Superman, that's it. Kryptonians on cocaine. Though I remain skeptical that James Gunn's Superman will be the smash hit that Warner Brothers so desperately needs it to be after years of questionable business decisions, there's been at least one movie this year so far that gives me hope that superhero cinema may indeed have a weird and wonderful future. Ryan Coogler's Sinners has proven to be the first blockbuster example of the horror to superhero director pipeline running in the opposite direction. The only exceptions seem to be directors who kept from horror to superhero films and then returned to their spooky roots, such as Sam Raimi with Drag Me to Hell or Scott Derrickson with his post-Doctor Strange hit The Black Phone. The extraordinary genre mashup that is Sinners has become 2025's most successful original film thus far, breaking numerous records and inspiring countless think pieces in the process. It is also currently outgrossing the aforementioned Thunderbolts. In a recent interview with Democracy Now! About his landmark new film, Coogler shied away from claims that the rights deal he secured for his new hit film is anything unique, implying that much of the media speculation may have something to do with the fact that Black Panther holds the record for the highest-grossing film directed by a black filmmaker. He describes his approach to making Sinners as a sort of cinematic gumbo, saying that he felt like the medium of horror allowed him to combine cultural influences in ways that didn't work in other genres. I believe this is true of superhero films too, and has been proven time and again by some of Hollywood's most unique and hardworking directors. These are not narrative skills Coogler learned in a vacuum. I eagerly anticipate what that experience of creating a successful high-concept horror film will mean for Black Panther 3 when Coogler inevitably returns to the franchise that shot him to superstardom. In a time where many people are questioning exactly what the path forward is for mainstream big-budget filmmaking, I think studios need to pay close attention to the plethora of data that supports the notion that while a standard action director may be easier to control, horror directors consistently make some of the most profitable, unique, and beloved superhero films out there. It is a trend that goes back to the very beginning of comic book movies and comic books themselves. It is not something to be scared of. And I like that. I want to read that article because that is exactly what I think. Again, that comes from Nick Hart. He's writing for Medium, and you can go see, there's a link to the article down in the description of this show. So, what do you think? I mean, are you still... look, I'm deliriously excited for Superman. I'm not going to lie. Now, does that have any bearing on anything else I love or am waiting for or want to see? No. I mean, I kind of take things at face value. I do not have, again, I do not have a particular fealty to people. If I like a director, I will go see their movies. You know, I still, despite I watch both versions of both parts of Rebel Moon, and I will still go see a Zack Snyder film. I enjoy what he does visually. You know, and I think it's cool that he went off and did his own thing. And, you know, do I own Sucker Punch action figures from Hot Toys? I do. Do I own Sucker Punch on disc? I do. Do I own the Sucker Punch soundtrack on CD? Yes, I do. What does that say about me? Don't know. But, you know, I think that, you know, we live in a time where there are the Trump administration has just called in the National Guard that is going to be, I guess, on the streets tomorrow, fighting against protesters who are protesting ICE taking people away. The idea that all illegal immigrants now have been criminalized, or they're being portrayed as criminals, I think is not great for the United States. And because there's a lot of people that aren't criminals that are coming here to seek asylum that really want to find a new life. And if you live in California, now I've lived here for 37 years, I've met so many great people that have come here, that I've interacted with, that I've worked with on many different levels that are not criminals. And to see the National Guard called out to go up against our own citizenry, well, I guess maybe the Second Amendment, everything that people said about, well, we have to have the Second Amendment in case our government rises up. Well, is that starting to happen tomorrow? I don't know how that's going to work out, but the idea of superheroics and superhero movies can, we can delve into these issues in a fantasy context, and it helps us better understand. It's like a spoonful of sugar. Science fiction, fantasy, and horror has always interested me because it is a genre, it's allegorical, and it's a way to delve into the human experience without offending many people's political or social sensibilities, because after all, it's a horror movie or it's a superhero movie. I mean, that's why Gene Roddenberry told to tell his stories in the science fiction context of Star Trek, or Rod Serling could tell his stories that he couldn't normally tell on television by taking us to the Twilight Zone. He could always say, look, we're putting these stories out there for people to ponder and consider, And I think, as Major Chai Chai said earlier, that Dan Simmons' book, Hyperion and Fall of Hyperion, are, first of all, those two books, they were written as one book, are two of the most imaginative books you'll ever read. So, again, how do we deal with what's going on? And I've done a version, of course, I've done a version of a show where I talked about science fiction as allegory and why it's great for storytelling. And superhero movies can be the same way. Now, I have a letter I would like to read. Let's see. This is not the letter that I meant. Let's see. Here we go. No, that's not it. Well, Major Chai Chai says that she said, I'm currently in Japan, and I was wandering the various souvenir shops near a shrine when I went into this one place, and to my surprise came across these cinema brochures, and one of them is Road to Perdition and The Ninth Gate and Close Encounters. Wow, those are very cool. I ended up buying about a dozen of them, most for about 200 to 300 yen, which is nothing. I got a few for you and some cat in the bag ones for Dieter. Yours truly, Major Chai Chai. I'll put that on the show tomorrow. So yeah. Now I did in fact have a letter that I, for some reason, cannot find now that I wanted to read on the show. So why is that? Let's see if I can find it. It's not coming up. Oh well, I should have found this earlier. I thought I did, but I didn't. I'll have to find it tomorrow. I'll read it on the next show. So I apologize for that. But anyway, I mean, when it comes right down to it, I'm excited to see Superman. I don't know if you should be. I don't know if you want to be. I don't know if you are. I know a lot of people are vehemently against it, which seems odd to me. Like, we're getting it. Why not go see it? Like if you go see Superman, it's not going to, people aren't going to, no one's going to, you're not going to get yelled at for it. Go check it out. Anastasio Gaming has just become a member, is an Imagination connoisseur. So I really appreciate that. Thank you for becoming an Imagination connoisseur. Hang on, there's another place I can look at for this letter that I was looking for. And I want to read it if I can find the damn thing. And I should have done it beforehand. And I apologize for not doing that. Normally I do. Hang on. No, that's not it either. Damn it. Well, I don't know what to tell you. I tried. I'll get the letters next time. And by the way, if you want to send me a letter, I'll read them on the show right there. But anyway, this has been a long show. And tomorrow, of course, we come back for our 201st episode of Let's Get Physical Media. And I will come back with Dieter Bastian and Max Allan Collins tomorrow to talk about what came out during the week. But anyway, hey, if you want to send me a letter or if you have ideas and topics you want me to discuss for shows or articles you want me to read or all that, I'm totally open to all of that. I'll be doing a lot of shows this month. I'll also be going to Martha's Vineyard for the celebration of Jaws at 50, where I'm going to be broadcasting. I've never been to Martha's Vineyard, so that'll be fun. And, you yell Barracuda. People say, huh? What? You yell shark, and you'll have a panic on your hand on the 4th of July. I got to get my quotes right. But on that note, I'm going to end this Saturday night show. I want to thank you all for being with me. I want to thank everybody for generously. 1001 Johnny says, look, because you have tips. I was looking for tips. But you know what's funny? I thought your tips were all from yesterday. I didn't realize you sent me tips today. But you did. 1001 Johnny says, I can't say I agree that Dawn of Justice is mean-spirited. Heavy, darker than Man of Steel. Dare I say, to borrow a phrase, it wants to fuck. Like The Empire Strikes Back? I don't know, 1000. I like the fact that you said Dawn of Justice wants to fuck. Look, like I said, my favorite thing in any of Zack Snyder's superhero movies is the beginning of Batman v Superman Dawn of Justice. As I said, I like Superman. I like Man of Steel a lot. I loved the apocalyptic battle over Metropolis with Zod. I love the fact that he killed him. What's he going to do? Put him in jail? Not going to work. I love the whole opening where you see that replayed from Bruce Wayne's point of view. And like you said, 1001 Johnny, that scene, if that movie likes to fuck, it does. I mean, there is no doubt that Zack Snyder is a filmmaker in my mind that likes to fuck. But you know what? He's a guy, he runs like a fucking jackhammer. He needs to bring his finesse game. You can't just want to fuck all the time. And anybody will tell you, a great fucker is somebody that takes you on a journey. You could be, you got to give it a little foreplay. You got to heat things up, bring them back down, heat them up again, come back down again. Not too fast, not too slow. It's a thing. It's a rhythm. You've got to kind of understand what you're doing. You got to move. You got to Les Grossman it. You got to know what's going on. And those movies are like full on. They're too full on. They need a little bit more. Look, what's mean-spirited is a mason jar full of piss, and you blow up a whole Senate chamber around Superman. You know what I mean? It's there isn't a lot of fun and joy and humor to offset the darkness in Zack Snyder's Superman movies. And I'm not saying they have to be laugh riots, but I'm looking for joy, and when I mean joy, I mean glee and fun. You need some of that, I think. Anyway, but thanks for that, Johnny. So yeah, I think I've got everybody taken care of. Yes, I think I've taken care of everybody. But thank you all for generously supporting this channel via super chats and tips. And Bajaro3 says, deleted scene of Delroy Lindo singing in Sinners is great. I don't know if I've seen that deleted scene of Delroy Lindo singing in Sinners. I loved Sinners. I've seen it 3 times. Why you asking to come in here? I love that scene so much. You came in here all day. It's so good. I love Sinners. Sinners, and the music is so good. Anyway, I want to thank Tom Jr. Jackson and my entire moderating staff. I want to thank you all for being here, and all you people that join the Post-Geek Singularity and subscribe and all that. And yeah, great time. But I love to hear from you. Send me letters. If you hate me, if you love me, I'll read them all. Take me to town. I have no problem reading criticism. So send it my way. And I will, make it available to you. Oh, 1001 Johnny says, well, 1001 Johnny says, well said, but I gotta say I had to have a cigarette after Batman v Superman. Empire had dismemberment and brutalizing Luke throughout. It looked like he came out of a car crash. Yeah, but you still got to see him training with Yoda. You know, no different. Not this crude material. But look, I understand what you're saying about Batman v Superman. I appreciate it. I love Batman v Superman for what it does. But it's, you know, it's pretty mean-spirited. It's pretty mean-spirited. And while, you know, look, talk about a horror. That movie is a horror film. Batman v Superman is more of a horror movie than it is a superhero movie, even though superheroes are in it. I mean, my God, the nightmare sequence, which is great, but like, you know, what did that even mean? If you don't know what's going on, I know it was going to pay off in Justice League. We could argue that all the time, but it's a mean movie. Batman's mean. You know, Lex Luthor's mean. I'm going to kill your mother. I mean, it's just like, at least Lex Luthor did it with panache. Anyway, on that note, I'll see you guys back here tomorrow at 11 for Let's Get Physical Media, episode number 201. I can't believe we've been doing these shows every Sunday. 201 episodes. It's going to be, the episode's called 201, or 201 A Sarbrukan Odyssey. Dieter's like, what happened to the extra zero? I'm like, you don't get a 2001 show yet. Come on, man. That takes a while. Anyway, on that note, remember, every person you meet has a story to tell that you have yet to hear. And all you have to do is listen. And look, I couldn't talk mad shit unless I've been doing my own work. Go check out our 10-part audio drama that is star-studded. We got Michael Rosenbaum. We got Lex Luthor in it. We got Katie Sackhoff. We got Starbuck in it. I got David Strathairn, who played Edward R. Murrow in the movie Good Night and Good Luck, was nominated for an Oscar. I got Bill Sadler, who played the villain in Die Hard 2, and he played Death in Bill and Ted's Bogus Journey. We've got a great cast. I got Bill Smitrovich, who was in the Star Trek episode Deep Space Nine's two-parter, Past Tense. If you go to truenoir.co, you can have the entire series. It's 4.5 hours long for only $30, and I directed it, I produced it, I edited it, and it was written by Mystery Writers of America Grandmaster Max Allan Collins, who brought you Road to Perdition. Yes, the graphic novel that the movie was based on. This is a quality product, and I put everything I have into it, kids. So if you want to see something I've done that is not superhero related, but it is detective, and it's noir and historical, and it's pretty great, if I do say so myself. Check it out. Paul Chatto gave us a great review. Look up his review on YouTube. Paul Chatto, look at his channel. He reviewed True Noir. Check it out. I'll be back here probably tomorrow night. I have to make another drive to the airport, my second drive to LAX, which for me, last time took 4 hours round trip. But anyway, I'm babbling. I need a drink. I'm going to go build my 1/8 scale Spy Who Loved Me submarine Lotus Esprit. So I'm at part 8 of 12. So I will see you later. Have a good night. Oh, wait. Jeremiah Humbry says, did you see the popcorn box for Superman? I want your thoughts. I have not seen. Is it the one that is like an old-time popcorn maker with Superman going in through the glass? That's the only thing I haven't seen. If that's real, I want that. I also want the Galactus one. So, that, yeah. Bring it on. And thanks for your support, Jeremiah.